I'm going to talk a little bit about counterfeits, detecting counterfeits, authenticity, and things of that nature. So I'm going to start with a story that a few years ago. There was an elderly Chinese gentleman that called me up and asked me if I would 3D scan a couple of sculptures that he had. And I agreed, and he brought them in it was like a lettuce box or something of that nature. And he showed them to me, and I said, yeah, we'll scan them and get it back to you. And he left me his phone number. Well, I had his phone number already, and he left. And then I started to do some research on those two sculptures. And what I discovered is they were very, very old. And they were very, very valuable. And at one time they were owned by a particular family in China. And when the Chinese Communist Party took over, those items and many others were confiscated by the government. And here I had them in my hands. And when I saw that and realized that, I told Melinda, my employee that does most of the scanning, I said, drop everything, make this a top priority. And the reason was those things, they were valued at millions of dollars each, and they were irreplaceable. I wanted them out of the building, off my property. I was, quite frankly, a little bit scared, wondering what the deal is with this. So she scanned, we created a 3D file of each, and then I called the gentleman up, and he came back to get them, and I mentioned him. I said, these are very, very old, aren't they? And he said, yes, they are. I said, how old? And he said, it dates back to the dynasty period in China, several hundred years old. And I said, they are very valuable, aren't they? And he said, yes. And I looked at him and I said, how did you dare just bring them in like this in a lettuce box like this? And he smiled and he said, well, he said, security through obscurity. If you bring them in like that, nobody thinks they're valuable, and they leave them alone. So he asked how much I'd charge. I said, I'm not going to charge you anything, but I want to ask you some more questions. I says, what do you intend on doing with these 3D scans? And he smiled, and we sat down, and he gave me a story. And in that story, the realization came to me that this was a technique that what he was presenting to me, it was a technique that was useful for detecting counterfeits. So the story that he told me starts with an RFID chip. That's like the chips that you inject into your pet dog or whatever. Starts with that, a little size of a grain of sand. And he was going to attach an RFID chip to each of the sculptures, a unique one. And he was going to attach it in such a way where if the chip was removed, it would damage the chip and make it non-functional. But also in a way where if it was placed and removed, it wouldn't hurt the sculpture. And then he was going to tie that data on the NFT chip as well as the 3D scans to an NFT, non-fungible token. Now, what's an NFT? Google it. What you'll find, now you've heard of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is layered on something called a blockchain, and it is distributed among computers worldwide. Who knows how many? Hundreds of thousands of computers. it is impossible to, at least with known methods, to forge a Bitcoin or to create a counterfeit Bitcoin. And it's because of the blockchain technology that it's layered on that that's possible. And that technology is distributed. It's not dependent on any one person. So here's the thing, if you have a system that is dependent on a single person, so any business approach, any business plan that can be deactivated or turned off with a flip of the switch by a single individual or a single entity is not a good plan. So this system is layered on the blockchain that is distributed among hundreds of thousands of computers worldwide. And if a counterfeit is detected, is tried to be brought in, first off, if it's brought into a different blockchain, you immediately detect that it's counterfeit because it's not the same blockchain. Now, if it's the same blockchain, then all of these computers worldwide will detect it. And I don't know the technology behind it, but it's doable. It's done with crypto. And they will invalidate the counterfeit, the fraud. And it is self-governing and not dependent on a single individual or a single company or a single government. So what he was doing, he didn't need the 3D scans for that. It was an added plus. So he would take the digital data on the RFID and the digital data in the 3D scans and put that on an NFT that's layered on a blockchain. And bingo, he had a system that could detect the authentic unit, or it could the authentic sculpture, or it could detect a fake or a counterfeit. And that system works. And we've been looking at that system for a few years. Why have we not implemented that for our kits? And the reason is simple. It's not cost effective yet. However, there is a trend. Anything that's digital in form is trending downward toward approaching zero cost. Bandwidth per megabyte, it's approaching zero cost. Anything that's digital. And it will be cost effective at some point, but right now it's like, I don't know, 70, 80 bucks to tag a kit in that manner. So what you'd do is first off, you'd have to manufacture a bunch of RFID chips that are unique per chip. You'd stick them in an RFID gun and inject the RFID into the neck of the doll or the flange, whether it's the head or the limbs or whatever it is that you want to positively identify. You inject it in, and then you encode that digital data on an NFT. It's that simple. And if the chip's not there, it's a fake. If somebody tries to manufacture a chip with the same RFID, they have to tie it to the same blockchain or it's detected as a fake. And if they attempt to tie it to the same blockchain, there's technology in place that will again detect it as a fake. You can't beat it. I don't know of a system there's no way comes back to crypto. You can't forge crypto. You can't create counterfeit crypto, and that is why. It's the technology that it's layered on. This is something that would have the same benefits. Come to find out also, there are many luxury item manufacturers that are already doing this. Why? Well, because that 70, 80 bucks is it's not a big expense to them, but for a kit, it's a lot of money. So you'd have to custom manufacture the RFID, stick it in a gun, inject it, create the NFT, and to create the NFT, there's accounting fees, to pay the network that it's layered on, which is usually the Ethereum network, to pay that, and there's what they call gas fees. There's fees involved, and it's pricey right now, but it's absolutely doable. That's the technology, and that's the only technology that can identify authentic from counterfeit. Well, unless you get into old stuff and get into things like carbon dating and crap like that. So, but that's the way to do it. But it's not ready for prime time. We're watching it, and when it is ready for prime time, we plan on implementing it. So now, in terms of counterfeit, what if once you discover a counterfeit, now what do? Oh, there's somebody counterfeiting, because this system does not stop counterfeiting. It is a system to detect counterfeiting. It is impossible to stop counterfeiting, but it is very possible to have a foolproof system that can detect the counterfeit. So it's important that you understand that distinction. Now, so you find a counterfeit, now what do? The next thing, you got all this talk about contracts and this and that in China and Brazil or Spain, or those are counterfeiting hotspots. And, oh, you gotta have contracts, you gotta have this, you gotta have that. Guys, any violation of USA law is prosecutable in USA courts. Nothing else matters for a USA citizen. Now, the USA economy is the major economy of the world. So even if you're out of the country, it's something to think about. Again, any violation of US law is prosecutable in US courts. China law doesn't matter. Brazil law doesn't matter to that question. Spain law doesn't matter to that question. It is prosecutable in US courts if US law is violated. Period. Now, we have launched over a dozen, I think, lawsuits against counterfeiters, and so far we've won every one. We've collected over $500,000 in damages, actual money that we've collected. We've been awarded many millions of dollars beyond that. We've done it in US courts for counterfeits that showed up in the US. So here's another thing. So we've got millions of dollars worth of uncollected damages against Chinese companies that have been awarded to us in US courts. We've collected over $500,000 from assets that we've been able to find in the US that were reachable by the US courts. But what about those other millions? So I talked to and we have many different contacts in China. I talked to one particular one, and this person will remain unnamed for obvious reasons. And I said, suppose we assigned you litigation rights to go after these companies in China to collect on this US debt. Is it doable? Is this something you're interested in? And you can collect the majority of the money, we don't care. His answer was kind of surprising. Now, oh, there's so much there. One of the things he talked about, he identified a particular company that is the source of all the counterfeiting, in his opinion and knowledge based, and he's in China. And he says everybody knows. It's the source of the counterfeiting, this particular company. So when China's an interesting mishmash of communism and capitalism, and I don't understand the mix and how it works, but I can say that if you cross the Communist China Party, the CCP, when you're in China, you have problems, big time problems, and whatever it is they decide, you have to toe the line, even if you have a capitalistic company there that however that works there. It's an interesting mix. whatever it is. What he told me is that this particular company, their entire business model is to counterfeit. And they've been doing it for decades with different things through different industries. That's their entire business model, and the Chinese government protects them. He says, if I were to go up against that, I would be ostracized. I would be shut down, is what he was telling me. I couldn't move forward. I would be bankrupt. Can't do it. He said, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. That's the situation there. And a contract with one of those manufacturers isn't gonna help if that source that is protected by the CCP decides to counterfeit it. It isn't gonna matter. Where you work is you prosecute, at least for us, in US courts, and in that case, you look for violations of US law and you bring it to court. And we've won a bunch of those. Nothing else matters. All this talk is just a bunch of nonsense from people that don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, I'll wind down. So think about all that. Thank you.